It was 3:58 a.m., too quiet to be real. The Arctic stretched in a frozen stillness, the horizon a pale smear of steel and fog. Every sensor blinked like a heartbeat in the darkness. The waves barely moved, whispering against the hulls as if the sea itself were holding its breath. Then a flicker, a blip on the radar, sudden, precise, impossible to ignore. U.S. naval ships moving closer to Greenland, slicing through the void with intent. A ripple went through the command room, subtle but immediate. Eyes locked on the screens, fingers hovered over controls. The soft hum of electronics became a chorus of tension, alarms pulsing like nervous veins. "They're pushing forward!" The commander's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the stillness like a blade. Every syllable weighed heavy. Silence returned, thick, almost suffocating. Every second stretched longer than it had the right to. Time slowed. Every monitor, every blinking light, every distant sonar echo amplified the gravity of the moment. The world felt suspended. What would you do with 10 seconds left before the line is crossed? The radar blips multiplied, algorithmic precision slicing through the Arctic cold. This wasn't a trial run, this wasn't a drill. This was a calculated move, a shockwave of intent, and Denmark's naval command could feel the rupture before the first shot could even exist. Across the room, the officers stiffened. Not one word, not one casual breath. Eyes darted, minds racing. Calculations ran like wildfire beneath calm faces. A paradigm shift had begun. Suddenly, the entire Arctic theater was a chessboard, and every ship was a pawn and a king at once. Outside, the night pressed in. Fog and shadow became allies and adversaries alike. The U.S. ships didn't hesitate. Their approach was deliberate, dominant, mechanical. Each wave their hull cut left a silent wake of warning. In contrast, the Danish fleet remained motionless, almost meditative, waiting, watching, calculating. The air itself seemed to tense, thick with anticipation. This was the moment where foresight mattered more than firepower, where strategy would outweigh mass, where a single command could determine the shape of the horizon. In the control room, the soft taps of fingers on consoles echoed louder than any gunfire. Charts flickered across screens. Target vectors, distances, wind currents, ice drift. Everything analyzed, simulated, predicted. The tension was clinical yet alive. A single misstep would trigger an irreversible chain. But the calm in the room was deceptive. Beneath it, a storm of readiness churned. This was mastery over uncertainty, dominance through discipline. Precision was the weapon, and silence its amplifier. The first subtle signals arrived. An echo of sonar, a ripple across encrypted channels. U.S. ships adjusting formation, calculated, aggressive, a test of nerve. Denmark's response was invisible but immediate. Fleets repositioned like an unseen hand sweeping across a game board. Every movement a message, every alignment a declaration. The line is drawn, step beyond it, and consequences will follow. The clock ticked toward 4 a.m., and the air itself seemed to thrum with expectation. Seconds became a heartbeat. Heartbeats became a countdown. 03 Foth 9. 03 Foth 9:30. Every fraction mattered. The Arctic, for all its emptiness, felt alive. The cold bit deeper. The radar screens glowed brighter. Outside, the night was a canvas. Dark ships threading light and shadow, approaching the unseen boundary. The commander exhaled slowly, a controlled release. Every decision now mattered. Every thought could become action. The threshold was near. And then the narrator whispers, low, almost philosophical. Right here, the moment begins where retreat is no longer an option, where the mind must outpace the mass, where a single decision shapes the currents of history, unseen yet inevitable. Outside, the waves licked the hulls. The silence, almost reverent, held its edge. Something was coming, something calculated, something that could not be predicted, only prepared for. The blips continued, relentless. The Danish eyes never left the screens. Every hand stayed ready. every mind sharpened. And just as the clock edged toward 4 a.m., the faintest tremor in the data hinted at the first move, a subtle deviation, almost imperceptible. The Arctic waited, the commanders waited, and the world, suspended between anticipation and reality, held its breath. Something was about to happen. And whatever it was, it would set the tone for the seconds, minutes, and decisions to come. The waves whispered. The lights flickered. And in the deep Arctic cold, a single thought threaded through every mind. What comes next will decide everything. It was 4:02 a.m., too precise to be random. The Arctic air pressed against the hulls, icy and unforgiving, while inside the command room, the Danish commander leaned over the map with quiet intensity. His finger traced a line, deliberate, bold, unwavering. "This is the red line," he said, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of inevitability. Around him, officers froze, fingers poised above controls, eyes reflecting the glow of screens that charted every blip of movement in the frozen waters. Outside, engines hummed like restrained beasts, the Danish fleet locking positions as if a single thought had commanded them into readiness. The U.S. ships kept moving, methodical, ignoring the warning. Every advance was a challenge, a test of nerve, a deliberate stroke of dominance against a boundary that had never been meant to be crossed. The room held its breath. Even the subtle thrum of engines seemed to pause, waiting for a rupture that might never come, or might arrive in seconds that felt like hours. What would you do with 10 seconds left before the line is breached? Could strategy truly outweigh brute force in a moment charged with tension and consequence? The map reflected the strategic chaos outside. Currents, ice flows, the unpredictable sweep of Arctic winds. Each line, each coordinate, each blip on the radar was more than data. It was potential, a signal of disruption waiting to cascade. The commander's hand moved deliberately, a slow, human algorithm of decision and foresight. This was not war yet, it was anticipation. A chessboard stretching across the frozen sea where every move mattered, and hesitation was a liability. Every second sharpened the mind. Every calculation amplified the risk. The silence was deceptive. It was a calm threaded with aggression. The Danish fleet was invisible yet formidable, engines humming, systems primed, a network of precision awaiting a single command. Outside, the U.S. vessels did not pause, their approach a study in calculated audacity. They tested boundaries, pressed forward, forced the confrontation into being. The Arctic itself seemed to shiver with the tension, a landscape of ice and shadow transformed into a proving ground for strategy and will. The red line on the map was not just a mark, it was a declaration, a statement of dominance, a barrier that demanded acknowledgement. Inside, officers ran mental simulations at speeds machines could envy. What if they veered left? What if they accelerated through the choke point? Each scenario carried consequences, measured not in seconds, but in shockwaves that could echo far beyond the Arctic Circle. Precision and foresight became the weapons, outpacing firepower, guiding the fleet through an invisible lattice of potential chaos. The commander's gaze never left the line, never wavered. In that moment, the world outside, the dark frozen expanse, was a canvas for human calculation, a place where mind outranked mass. The U.S. ships drew closer, each passing moment a subtle tremor in the balance of power. The hum of engines grew louder, more insistent, a heartbeat in the frozen night. The Danish fleet shifted imperceptibly, a ripple through the formation, a quiet demonstration of readiness. Every move spoke without sound, every alignment sent a message. Cross this line and face the consequences. Outside, the Arctic waters became more than water. They were a statement, a battlefield of anticipation, a theater where dominance was measured not in weapons fired but in nerves held. Time condensed, stretched, and fractured. 4:05 a.m., the second after the commander finished tracing the line, and the silence was no longer empty. The engines thrummed, the radar screens blinked, and the distant lights of approaching ships became a mirror for the tension inside. The narrator's voice cut through the mechanical hum. If this line is crossed, the entire Arctic could change forever. And in those words hung the weight of inevitability. the unspoken philosophy that strategy must anticipate, foresight must command, and the mind must always outrun force. No one moved unnecessarily. No one spoke beyond necessity. Every heartbeat, every breath, every decision coalesced into a suspended moment of pure, cinematic tension. The Arctic itself seemed alive, a participant in the silent standoff, icy and patient, but ready to react to the first rupture. The blips on the radar grew closer, subtle deviations signaling intent, a test of nerves, a precursor to chaos. And as the Danish fleet held, immovable and precise, the scene stretched taut. Every second a countdown, every glance a calculation, every whisper a potential trigger. Outside, the horizon trembled under the faint glow of emerging sun. But inside, time had no mercy. The red line was more than a mark, it was a principle. Crossing it was more than a maneuver, it was a statement. And in the tension that thickened the air, in the subtle hum of engines, in the blinking of radar lights, one question pulsed quietly, inexorably. What happens if the line breaks? The answer remained unspoken, suspended in the Arctic cold, ready to erupt the moment someone dares. The world held its breath. Every eye, every sensor, every calculation leaned into the unknown. And in the quiet hum of precision, the narrative paused, leaving a single truth hanging. Some boundaries are not just drawn. They are defended with mind, with strategy, and with the unrelenting patience of those who understand that foresight is the sharpest weapon of all. It was 4:06 a.m. The Arctic fog rolled across the water like a living thing, thick and merciless, swallowing light, sound, and certainty. Engines hummed low, a subtle, restrained roar beneath the ghostly veil, while faint alarms pulsed in sync with tense hearts inside the Danish command room. Every second stretched thick and sticky, each heartbeat a countdown, each breath a risk. Outside, shadows of steel moved like predators through the haze, U.S. ships advancing with deliberate precision, ignoring every warning, every unspoken challenge. And inside, the Danish fleet received the final confirmation. They are not slowing down. The words landed like a hammer. A rupture in the calm, a paradigm shift in strategy. Eyes snapped to screens. Minds calculating vectors, velocities, ice drift, wind direction. Every factor weighted against 1,000 potential outcomes. No room for error. The fog muted everything except the hum of engines and the subtle groan of hulls cutting through the freezing waters. Silence descended again, heavy and absolute, the kind that presses on the chest, that stretches every second into a lifetime. What would you do with 10 seconds left before chaos becomes reality? The Danish commanders moved almost imperceptibly, a choreography of discipline and foresight. Fingers brushed control panels, adjusting positions, recalculating defensive arcs. A ship here, a sonar ping there, every decision flowing from precision and anticipation rather than brute force. The U.S. vessels moved like a living algorithm, predictable in unpredictability, testing boundaries, probing weaknesses. Each blip on the radar a calculated incursion. The tension became almost physical, a shockwave that vibrated through the room, through the cold metal decks, through the minds of everyone on board. Outside, fog tangled with shadow, and the Arctic night seemed endless. Waves licked the hulls, but even water itself seemed to hesitate, suspended in the charged atmosphere. Every second carried weight. Every calculation was a measure of dominance, not just of firepower, but of mental edge. Inside the control room, officers exchanged no words. Eyes spoke in glances, nods, and micro-expressions. Strategy was the weapon, foresight the shield. Every move anticipated a reaction. Every plan accounted for ripple effects that might cascade into disaster if misjudged. Time condensed. The U.S. ships drew closer, engines humming louder, a low, resonant growl under the fog, a warning both mechanical and psychological. The Danish fleet remained patient, calculating, a network of living precision, ready to strike or respond at the perfect moment. Silence and motion existed simultaneously. The paradox of naval warfare distilled into tense seconds. The Arctic was a theater. Every frozen swell a stage, every blip a player, and every decision could ignite a chain reaction that no one could reverse. A subtle tremor ran through the radar. One of the U.S. ships adjusted its course, microseconds measured, a deviation so slight it could have gone unnoticed. But the Danish fleet felt it. A shift in the balance. Engines hummed, alarms whispered faintly, eyes narrowed. The commander's hand hovered above the controls, calm, yet deadly, every muscle attuned to the smallest anomaly. A philosophical understanding ran beneath the chaos. Strategy, force, mind, mass, anticipation, firepower. One precise choice could avert catastrophe, or trigger it. Seconds blurred into moments of pure awareness. Every officer, every sailor felt the tension tighten like a bowstring. Outside, the approaching silhouettes of U.S. ships grew more defined in the fog, steel-cutting shadows, engines thrumming with intent. The Arctic seemed to inhale collectively, waiting for rupture, for shockwave, for the unseen pivot that would tip the scales. And inside, the Danish commanders held their positions, calculating, holding the line not just with weapons but with nerves sharpened to razor edges, a silent demonstration of dominance without a single shot fired. The narrator's voice, low and tense, slices through the hum of machinery. The next decision, it's not just Denmark's. The fate of the Arctic hangs in the balance. One wrong move, one hesitation, one misread signal, and the landscape of power could change forever. The fog thickened, swallowing the light from the command room, the horizon, the distant flashes of steel. The seconds stretched, the engines droned, the radar blinked. Everything paused on a knife edge. And then, imperceptibly, the first ripple of movement signaled it. A subtle course correction from the U.S. fleet. A test, a challenge, a warning wrapped in motion. The Danish fleet responded with invisible precision, every micro-adjustment a silent message. And just as the Arctic world seemed suspended in perfect stasis, one thought threaded through every mind in the command room. Something is coming. Something unavoidable. Something that will define not only the standoff, but every calculation, every strategy, every heartbeat that follows. The fog swirled. The Arctic night held its breath. The engines hummed. And in that frozen moment, the tension remained unresolved. A living thing waiting for rupture. Waiting for impact. Waiting for the first undeniable spark of confrontation. The seconds before impact stretched on, infinite and heavy, leaving the audience suspended, wondering, leaning forward, unable to blink, unable to turn away. It was 4:01 a.m., too precise to be coincidence. The Arctic air was sharp, biting through layers of steel and fog, carrying the smell of salt and tension. Outside, the water roiled gently. But inside the Danish command room, the atmosphere was electric, suspended in a frozen heartbeat. The U.S. ship glided closer, blurring into the horizon, every meter a deliberate provocation, every second a test of nerve. The red line on the map seemed to glow under the dim lights, a threshold as much psychological as physical. The commander's hand hovered over the command button, frozen yet poised, a single decision capable of reshaping this icy theater forever. Time itself felt elastic, stretching and contracting with every flicker of the radar. 10 seconds felt like 10 minutes. Every officer held their breath. Every machine hummed in anticipation. Sensors alive, screens blinking like heartbeat monitors in a high-stakes operating theater. Outside, the U.S. ship's engines droned low, mechanical, and steady, a reminder that dominance isn't always violent. It can be deliberate, precise, unrelenting. The Arctic fog wrapped around everything like a shroud, muffling sound but amplifying awareness. Every wave, every shadow, every faint reflection became a variable, a threat, a signal. The commander's eyes tracked the vessel with surgical attention. His mind ran faster than the algorithms guiding the fleet, anticipating each micro-movement. Would they veer left, accelerate, attempt a decoy maneuver? One wrong calculation could trigger a chain reaction, a rupture of strategy that could ignite conflict in seconds. The room was silent, but for the subtle thrum of engines, a rhythm both reassuring and terrifying. Every tap on a console, every flicker of a screen, became part of a complex dance of dominance, a war fought with precision and nerve rather than immediate firepower. Outside, the approaching ship cut through the fog, each meter forward a silent challenge. The Danish fleet responded with invisible choreography. Ships adjusted imperceptibly, engines shifting, sonar pings weaving a web of anticipation. Every alignment communicated intent, a quiet assertion of control without firing a single shot. The red line was more than a boundary. It was a statement. Cross it, and consequences would unfold not as punishment, but as the inevitable logic of strategy. Every sailor, every officer understood that the mind must outpace the mass, foresight must guide force, and patience is often the deadliest weapon. The seconds dragged on, heavy with expectation. The Arctic seemed to hold its breath, the fog thickening, the water still trembling under the weight of the unseen tension. The U.S. ship nudged closer. Subtle deviations like whispers of intent, almost imperceptible but catastrophic if ignored. The commander's hand remained poised over the button, the ultimate arbiter of rupture, dominance, and precision. Outside, waves lapped silently at the hulls, but every ripple felt charged with possibility. Every crest a question mark suspended in frozen time. The narrator's voice cut through the hum, low, almost haunting. In this second, history will either be written or the Arctic will ignite. The words hung in the air, heavier than ice, heavier than engines, heavier than the silence that stretched between the fleets. A microsecond could tip the scales. A single impulse could send shockwaves across the Arctic, ripple through strategy, echo through time. The tension was tangible, a living organism breathing alongside the crews, waiting to erupt, to test nerves and the limits of anticipation. Eyes met eyes, unspoken commands flowing like currents through the room. Every sensor reading, every alignment, every calculation pulsed in sync with the decision that had yet to be made. The U.S. ship advanced with clinical certainty, each maneuver a deliberate algorithm of provocation. And still, the Danish fleet waited, engines humming, a precise warning, hulls cutting invisible lines of dominance through fog and water. Strategy, force, mind, mass, patience, firepower. A subtle tremor ran through the radar, almost imperceptible, like a heartbeat that no one dared fully acknowledge. The red line was inches away. The fog thickened further, swallowing silhouettes and horizon alike. The Arctic seemed alive, watching, judging, responding to the tension, an indifferent witness to human precision and nerve. The seconds stretched into infinity. Every heartbeat mattered. Every breath was a choice. Then the screen cuts to black. Silence swells. Only one line remains, glowing faintly, a question that refuses closure. What happens next? No one expected. The tension lingers in the mind, the anticipation unresolved, the Arctic waiting for the spark that will ignite the inevitable. Strategy, patience, precision, all suspended on the edge of a single, frozen moment where history teeters between writing itself and shattering into chaos.